All right, so today what I want to do is hop in and do a live assessment of some website performance on a website that we have here. So I was on Upwork just kind of scrolling through, seeing what was out there, and I came across this posting. Somebody's asking, looking for someone to help me optimize my website, desktop and mobile. They didn't specify exactly what they want to optimize, but it kind of intrigued me. So I went ahead and opened up the link and I saw that there were some performance issues. It looked like there was a bunch of performance issues. So I want to walk you through essentially how I take a look at websites and start to diagnose the problems and see what's going on. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm just going to copy this link, and it's very important that you actually open up a incognito browser. Reason being, first of all, you don't want anything cached, so you want a fresh load of the site. The other thing too is that if you've got plugins installed in your, let's say you've got Chrome, and you've got a bunch of different plugins installed, that can actually affect the performance of a website. So you want to be as unbiased as possible and remove any kind of plugins. And the best way of doing that, in my opinion, is just open an incognito browser, or you can have separate profiles specifically in Chrome that you can use. So if you've got one without any plugins, that's probably going to be ideal. So as you saw, we just loaded up the website. Initial impressions was it was a pretty, let's do this again. We'll just go on a blank screen, you can click enter. So it's much faster. So that leads me to believe right off the bat is that they do have some kind of caching involved, because the first time that we loaded this, anything to get initially painted took a while. So what I'm going to do, open up Chrome DevTools here, and so what I'm going to do is open up Chrome DevTools here, and the first thing I typically go to is the network, and we want to disable cache. So before we had caching turned, I believe that there was probably some caching going on based upon how quickly it reloaded. But let's do another refresh here and just kind of see what happens. So you can see it's still spinning, still pending. So that took a while, that initial page load. And that gives me, excuse me, that gives me a few ideas as to what might be going on. So the first thing I'm going to do is this waterfall approach. I like to sort it and to kind of see how all of the assets were loaded on in. So you can see the initial homepage right here. You can see we're just requesting the homepage. That right there took around 4.8 seconds to load, which is a very long time waiting for server response. So you can see that there's definitely some issues there. My assumption right now, so the waiting for server to respond versus content download. So content download was pretty small, only 78 milliseconds. So it actually wasn't a lot of data sending, so that was pretty quick. Waiting for server to respond. So there's something going on the server that is causing this to run extremely slow. So it could be their actual hosting solution. Maybe they just don't have a powerful enough server. They could be on a shared server. That's quite possible. Or let's say they're running WordPress, which is quite possible. We'll look into that in a little bit. They can have a lot of plugins installed, which can slow down any kind of requests going to the server. So yeah, first impression, there's definitely something going on server side, just not sure what. Obviously, I don't have access to their source code, so I can't tell you specifically, but that's the first thing I'm looking at. Next thing I'm looking at down here, they give you a nice little summary of everything that's going on. So 161 requests, 25 megabytes downloaded. And finished 1.4 minutes. This is atrocious. 5.31 seconds for DOM content loaded, 9.3 seconds for the actual load. So I'm not going to go into what all these specifics are, but 28 pages, 28 megs or so for stuff to be downloaded. That's very, very high, especially if you don't have any videos or anything along those lines. So we're going to close out that. Also, it's a large number of requests. And what I'm seeing here is a lot of JavaScript files. All I'm doing at this point is I'm just gathering information. So I see the word WooCommerce here, and I know that that is built upon WordPress. So I've got a very good idea. If not, I actually know that this is a WordPress website. No surprise there. And there's just a lot of JavaScript files. So what you can do is you can filter up here just for JS. Before I was looking at CSS files. So right now you can see that there's a lot of JS files. Specifically, there's 59 out of 162 JavaScript files. In terms of CSS, we've got 41 separate files. So that's a lot of stuff that really does lead me to believe that they probably have a ton of plugins that are installed, because typically whenever you install plugins, they'll want to use their own CSS, their own JavaScript, and that can cause a lot of issues. Once again, these are hypotheses. I don't know exactly for sure what's going on. So that's issue number one, or I guess we kind of go through that. Let's see here, Lighthouse. So Lighthouse is always good. Basically what this does is it simulates right now it's simulating a mobile device, and basically slows down the network, kind of throttles it, also throttles down the CPU. I am on a high-end MacBook Pro on a very fast Wi-Fi connection right now, so that's not always the most realistic scenario to be testing in. So Lighthouse will run the site through a handful of tests, and then it'll spit you back some results. It gives you a nice high-level overview as to what's going on. My guess is it's going to say reduce the amount of JavaScript loaded, combine the files, probably minify them, but let's see. So Lighthouse does a very good job of kind of giving you some starting points of some things that you should work on. So it could take a little bit to run sometimes, anywhere from 10 seconds to about a minute or two. So we'll just let this wrap up. Okay, excellent. So first thing we're going to look at here, we're only going to be focused on the performance, even though it does talk about accessibility, best practices, SEO, progressive web apps. So performance 32 out of 100. Honestly, I thought it was going to be lower than that. Either way, 32 is not great. Typically, any kind of clients that I work with, I like to see them right around 80 or somewhere above. Sometimes you can't get all the way up to 100, which is totally understandable. But if we can get you to 80, 75, 80, that's definitely a pretty fast website. So as we saw before, the first contentful paint, 5.3 seconds. That was just in line with like the 4.8 seconds that we had before. We're not going to go through all of these different ones that we have here. But what I kind of like to look at next is the screenshots of kind of a timeline as it loads. You can just see blank page for a while, and then finally you get something that's drawn on screen. So yeah, definitely a major issue there. But then there's some other stuff as well too. So serve images in next gen formats. It says that we can save 92 seconds of loading, which I probably don't disagree with. I'm assuming a lot of the images we haven't even looked at images yet, but their Lighthouse is definitely identifying this as a performance issue. So my guess is that they're probably not cropped properly. The resolution's probably too high. It looks like they're serving a lot of PNGs based upon the name. They might not need to be PNGs. So it's important to understand when you should use a PNG versus a GIF versus a JPEG. We're not going to go into all that, but there is a reason why there are different image formats. So looks like there's a lot of savings that we can do there. Properly sized images is what I was talking about before, is that they might want to crop them down or reduce the resolution of them, or basically the image size. So if you're only showing a image that's 100 pixels by 100 pixels, technically that image should be rendered at 100 pixels by 100 pixels. What I see a lot of the times is that people just upload these massive images, maybe 6,000 by 6,000 pixels, when you're only showing on 100 by 100. So you're essentially just wasting a ton of data, because you don't need that kind of resolution when you're only going to be showing it in a very small viewport. Reduce initial server response time. That's what we spoke about earlier. Eliminate render blocking resources. So this is another very common one. Is essentially render blocking resource is going to be your CSS or your JavaScript. And what happens is when it receives the initial HTML response, if you've got your CSS and JavaScript not loaded in the correct manner, there's ways that you can optimize the loading. It's going to block displaying anything on the page until everything is downloaded, and that's not the best user experience. Essentially, what you want is, as data comes down from the server and you've got your HTML and you've got some CSS that's absolutely necessary, you can start rendering the website on the screen as that information comes in, as opposed to rendering it all at once everything is downloaded. So that's something you definitely want to do. Defer off-screen images. So another thing that's super important is if you've got images that aren't initially shown in your initial viewport. So what I mean by that is when you first land on the screen, if you've got images, say way down here, you might want to defer loading them. So as people start to scroll down the site, they get closer to loading that image, you load it on demand as opposed to loading everything all at once. So those are kind of the top big things that that they have right here. Avoid enormous network payloads. So once again, we've got one image here that's 6 megabytes. It looks like a little bit over 6 megabytes. Just curious what this one is. So you click on that, and yeah, there's no need to, even when it is blown up, I'm not sure exactly how large they're rendering this image. I'm assuming they could probably reduce the size of it, but you can also reduce the quality by using some compression, and you can actually compress it a lot and reduce a lot of the size of the actual image without losing a lot of the quality. And once again, this is a PNG, probably better off as a JPEG. JPEGs are better for photos for the most part. So I would recommend probably just compressing this down to some kind of a JPEG, and you could reduce that the size of this image by a lot. So those are kind of initial assessments that I have right there. Let's take another look. If we right click over here, excuse me, close this out. All right, view page source, just want to check something. Okay, so this is all the HTML that gets downloaded. One of the things I'd recommend is minifying it, and essentially what that does is you see a lot of white space in between here. There's a lot of white space in between all these HTML tags. That's actually not needed. You don't need any white space in HTML. And by minifying it, you remove all of the white space, and it condenses the amount of data that gets sent down to the browser, so then it can download significantly quicker. So that's another thing that I would probably add on here, is get some kind of compression. WordPress does offer some kind of plugins that you can add to this site actually, and I know that I said plugins can become a performance issue, but there's also plugins that you can have that will minify your HTML for you, and also you want to do that with your CSS and your JavaScript as well too. So I'd probably recommend doing that, especially with how much JavaScript and CSS is on this website. Doing some kind of minification, then also combining some of these CSS files and JavaScript files. So if we just do a quick refresh again, you can see once again it's taken a while. But if we just limit this down to JS, what you can actually do, instead of making 58 separate requests, you can reduce this down to maybe a handful of requests, and you can merge some of these files together. So there's less network requests. Granted, you will get a larger file returned back to you, but it's less network requests, and you kind of want to avoid going to the network whenever possible, because your network is typically one of the larger bottlenecks that you have. So before I did any of that stuff though, what I would do is just say plug in Audit, go through and remove everything that absolutely is not necessary. The other thing I would check as well too, once you kind of do that, is you might want to check your hosting. There are definitely, not all hosting is made equal. So if this is on a lower end hosting service, or maybe it's just a package with your hosting provider, you're trying to get the cheapest one possible, you might be on shared host. The problem with that is that you don't control all of those resources. So when there's more resources available on a shared host, then you can access them. Your site will run faster. But if somebody else has got a website that's running a lot of traffic through it, you are actually going to lose some of that performance, and that could be a major issue. So you want to make sure you're going with a solid host for your website. So. I hope that this was useful. There's a lot more information we can get into here, but typically the first things I like to address: remove the plugins, do an audit there, take a look at the amount of CSS, JavaScript that you're sending, and then also try and reduce the size of your images. That will really go a long way. There's definitely more stuff you can do past that, but I think that that's typically the best place for anybody to start.